In 2012, something happened to me. Something that happens to many of us who played Magic the Gathering when we were kids. And what happened was, I got back into the game. I had played Magic the Gathering throughout high school, but quit and sold my collection when I went off to college. It had been about 15 years since I had played. My wife had never played, but she wanted to learn. So we went down to our local game store, and after a fun chat about our interests and goals with the game, we were handed this. A duel deck, specifically a Johnny vs. Bolas, the first product I bought when returning to Magic. This sealed one is a copy that I bought later for nostalgia's sake, but I still have the original 2 decks that my wife and I got back into the game with. This is them right here. They've still got the same sleeves as well. Original formula dragon shields. They were something else. From there, we played in our very first pre-release, picked up a fat pack and a deck builder's toolkit, and of course, a lot of booster packs. Okay, a booster box of the set we had just pre-released in, Original Innistrad. They just called Original Innistrad back then. That's actually where I discovered that if I sold the Snapcaster Mage, Liliana of the Veil, Garruk Relentless, and a couple other cards that I had opened in the box, that those 5 to 6 cards would be enough for me to buy another box. You know what that led to, right? I bought an event deck, which I made a few swaps to and took to my first Friday Night Magic. That Illusions deck took me to first place in an 8-player FNM, and I won a promo of a Phyrexian Metamorph. Watch out, Game Day Dark Ascension, because at that point, I was beyond hooked on the game. Magic products were just such an important part of getting so many of us into this game, of getting us hooked on playing down at our local game stores, and recently I realized that there really aren't that many Magic the Gathering products on the shelves anymore. These days, if you're not buying a booster box, then what's left on the shelf? The latest Commander Precon? But we used to have so much more. What happened? I think there's a lot more to how we got from there to here, and I want to explore it in this video. And I also want to just give you all of this. As you can see, I ended up with some extras. It was from the booster box game. And so this Thursday at 3 p.m. Pacific, I'm giving away an entire case of, I can't lift that up, of Edge of Eternity's play booster boxes, as well as just as many Edge of Eternity's Commander Precons. We're giving all of this away and more on Whatnot. Whatnot is just if Twitch and eBay had a baby. You can come hang out with me as I talk Magic the Gathering, answer your questions, and give away all of these great items. When you create a new account, you get a $15 credit to spend in my Whatnot store. You can spend that credit wherever you want on Whatnot. People stream themselves selling and auctioning off items, and you get $15 just for signing up. So come hang out with me. Let's talk about Magic the Gathering, and maybe you'll walk away with any one of these many, many Magic the Gathering booster boxes and commander decks, courtesy of Whatnot. I'll see you this Thursday at 3 p.m. Pacific, and thank you Whatnot for sponsoring this video. Not too long ago, your local game store was full of an array of Magic the Gathering products that were not only meant to fill many needs, but in some cases were meant to build into one another. The most obvious of these were intro packs and event decks, essentially meant as beginner and intermediate 60-card decks for you to pick up and have something to play with. Intro packs were by far the worst of the two. These were 60-card decks made up of commons and uncommons, mostly commons, and no more than 2 rares. Throughout the entire history of intro packs, the near entirety of these rares were absolute trash, valued even at the time of their release in the range of 25 to 50 cents. I think the biggest value rare ever was a Mistcutter Hydra that was worth $3.50 at the time. Beyond that, absolute jank. There was no universe in which you could play an intro pack deck at even the most casual of Friday Night Magics. They were piles of bulk with dubious themes that, again, were just a handful of commons and uncommons and a bulk rare or two. 2 intro packs cost about the same as 1 dual deck. If you were looking for 2 decks made to play against one another, the dual deck was by far the better way to go, as it had multiple rares of a variety of values, alternate arts, and a much higher power level, all while staying accessible to new players. Sure, you couldn't play a dual deck at Friday Night Magic, but you really couldn't play with an intro pack deck either. The most valuable thing about an intro pack was the fact they came with 2 booster packs of the current set. I worry that if I had bought 2 intro packs instead of a dual deck when I got back into Magic the Gathering, that I might not have gotten back into it for very long. While a Ajani vs. Bolas and the other dual decks I soon bought, Knight vs. Dragons, Fencer vs. Koth, Izzet vs. Golgari, were amazing play experiences, 60-card Dark Ascension bulk commons versus 60-card Dark Ascension bulk commons of another color is significantly less riveting. But intro packs and dual decks were eventually discontinued, and in the case of dual decks, I think it's a shame. While I graded some more highly than others over the years, overwhelmingly I thought they were a solid product, and one that succeeded more than it stumbled. I actually have a complete collection of every single dual deck ever made right here. I love these. This is something I really value. And while some dual decks were a lot worse than others, the very worst being Speed versus Cunning, that is hands down the worst dual deck ever made, there are so many great ones. If I had to pick a favorite, even though nostalgia is Ajani versus Bolas, I'm going to say that Izzet versus Golgari is the best dual deck just for a dual deck to play. If I could only keep one of these and play it for the rest of my life, Izzet versus Golgari, and I think it's a shame that they didn't complete that cycle. Where's Boros versus Simic, Rakdos versus Azurius? There's so many possibilities on Ravnica alone, let alone the rich and storied history of Magic the Gathering and its many worlds that we could have dove into with these dual decks. They did at least explore the guilds as standalone decks with Ravnica Guild kits. I loved these products. It was a one-off, and I don't think you could ever make it a series, but these were solid A products. The Ravnica Guild kits, standalone 60-card decks themed around a guild. They not only had special rares, but they also had these amazing artwork lands. I loved one-off explorations like this, like Commander's Arsenal, and these type of products too, they just don't seem to experiment with anymore. But if intro packs were meant for beginners and dual decks for casuals, then event decks were the stepping stones for intermediate gameplay. These were 60-card decks with 15-card sideboards that came out with each and every new Magic the Gathering set, and they were intended to allow you to sit down and play with them at Friday Night Magic right out of the box. While worlds better than intro packs, event decks suffered from 2 big problems. The first simply being that when a new set came out, Wizards of the Coast had no way of knowing what decks were going to emerge as the stars of the competitive scene, and thus they were just guessing at what sort of deck would be seeing play. Often, event decks missed the mark, though every now and then the contents were a solid hit, even if it never quite nailed the bullseye. Their other big limitation is that they'd only contain 1 to 2 copies of a handful of rares, and they never included mythics, which severely handicapped them. But the biggest problem is event decks just weren't what competitive decks looked like. As a real deck list you'd bring to Friday Night Magic would have cards from throughout all the sets currently in Standard, and of course would have play sets of most of the cards. But for all of their flaws, event decks had the right idea. A deck that you could buy and then sit down and play with at your local game store's Friday Night Magic. While they too were discontinued, a new product was designed to replace them. And while that product, Challenger decks, overwhelmingly succeeded in all the areas that event decks failed in, the product that came along to replace intro packs just failed. And that's because, puzzlingly, Planeswalker decks were designed to fail. Planeswalker decks were the successor to intro packs, and while at first many Magic the Gathering players were taken in by their low prices and the fact they came with a unique foil Planeswalker as the face card, they soon fizzled to the point of a relatively quick discontinuation. Why? Put simply, Wizards of the Coast did not want the Planeswalker cards to be good, and they even said so themselves. The concern was that if they designed a Planeswalker card that people wanted to play, then these would fly off the shelves and not be available for the target audience, new and prospective players. So they designed intentionally bad cards and intentionally bad decks. New players won't know the difference, right? But experienced players will, and this means they'd be left on the shelves for those prospective new players to find. I guess that's one way to deal with scalpers. a dumb way, and they were standard legal because Wizards wanted new players to get to sign up at F&M and play with the product they just bought. But they were so intentionally bad that these players would have been made mincemeat of and left with a pile of cards that no one wanted. It was a bizarre choice, and one that I felt was very bad for the game. Here's what I had to say about it at the time. Here is a suggestion. Why don't you sell a pre-constructed deck that, if I buy it, I can sit down with my friends and other people at my local game store and play it with their decks. As in, instead of intentionally making bad cards and an incomplete and underpowered deck, you intentionally make a good deck. What would happen if people who did not have a deck to play at Friday Night Magic could buy a deck to play at Friday Night Magic? Well, I imagine the game would be easier to get started in, easier to play, easier to enjoy, easier to return to, easier to learn in all aspects relating to going from not being a player to being an active player. How's that for a concept? Luckily, Wizards of the Coast hit a home run with their replacement product for event decks, Challenger decks, and unlike planeswalker decks, these contained playable cards and were designed to be competitive at in-store events. Challenger decks were, at least at the start, everything an event deck should have been. They looked to be very close approximations of real competitive decks that were being played in Magic the Gathering, complete with cards from throughout the current standard legality, 3 to 4 times copies of these cards, and even mythic rare inclusions. Challenger decks were indeed an amazing product, though they were not without their own shortcomings. The biggest issue was simply that the standard meta was so rapidly changing that Challenger decks could often feel somewhat out of date by the time they hit shelves. They also had a pretty high margin of variance in design. In reviewing them over the years, some were near carbon copies of winning competitive decks, often only a few cards off from what a pro player may have taken to a recent victory, while others were head-scratchers that did not seem to have much relevance to the current meta. Typically, my reviews would find one extraordinary Challenger deck, another one or two that were decent enough, and you know what? I was happy with these. Players need a product that they can just buy and play right out of the box. Even though Challenger decks needed a few upgrades, they at least gave players a path to their Friday Night Magic. They could buy one, open it up, sleeve it up, and sit down and play. I mean, think about Commander Precons. While these have indeed gotten more complicated over the years, see my video on that subject here, they are still a near-perfect product. Challenger decks were like Commander Precons, but for Standard. And they didn't stop at Standard. When Pioneer was created, they tried to encourage support by having Pioneer Challenger decks. Unfortunately, adhering to the strategy of selling a close approximation of a competitive 60-card deck was a lot harder to do in Pioneer, and despite raising the price on these, they struggled to take hold with players, in much the same way that Pioneer as a format has struggled to take hold. Eventually, both Challenger decks and Planeswalker decks were discontinued, and if you look at the shelves at your local game store today, they were replaced with nothing. One of the other long-forgotten products that helped me restart my Magic the Gathering journey back in the day was the Deck Builder's Toolkit, a product for $19.99 that gave you a bunch of booster packs, a ton of lands, and a varying assortment of commons, uncommons, and even some rares. The ratios of these varied from set to set, but it was always a hefty handful of cards, and you got this really nifty storage box. Honestly, the Deck Builder Toolkit boxes were one of the better designs, and a great little item to give to a new player starting their collection. The Deck Builder's Toolkit was a great way to get a fat stack of cards, though its contents were far from capable of actually building anything but a kitchen table casual deck. So while not the best overall product or even the best overall value, I did think that Deck Builder's Toolkits were decent enough as a starting point for new players. Although, for twice the price, you could get a real fat stack of cards with a fat pack, which back in the day was essentially an option to buy a portion of a booster box at bargain prices and also get get a lot of cool thrown-ins and inclusions. I won't linger too long on fat packs as they are essentially still around today, just with what I can only assume is intended as a less obesity-insensitive name of bundle, and with significantly less throw-ins and extras. As you can see in my recent review, these have turned into basically just packs in a box, which is a real shame. In a lot of ways, the Deck Builder's Toolkit, long since discontinued, and intro packs have been combined into one of the other remaining products on shelves today, the Starter Kit. This is, I think, one of the best new products for brand new players, as they are incredibly affordable, and you can usually pick up 2 playable decks for less than $10. And you'll even get a code for the exact decks on Magic Arena so that you can practice digitally. While not quite the same intent as the Deck Builder's Toolkit or even intro packs, Magic Starter Kits, I feel, fill the role intended better than either ever could. They are inexpensive and capable of giving new players a great first experience in Magic, and the fact that you get all the cards from both decks on Arena is a great feature, one that I really wish would be expanded to, well, every Magic the Gathering product. Not that there are many left on the shelves beyond these. The other mainstay of the local game store product line, long since vanished, was From the Vault. These were collections of 15 foil cards that shared a theme, such as From the Vault Dragons or From the Vault Lands. They called it Realms, but it was lands. From the Vault Angels. Keep in mind that these products predated even Masters sets, so getting reprints was extremely difficult back then, let alone reprints in special rainbow foil treatments with new artworks and even secret inclusions of a bonus rare or mythic from the next set. While, like all products, some from the vaults were better than others, this was a cool product that suffered from supply issues and Wizards' inability to combat scalpers. Most game stores would only receive anywhere from 5 to 10 copies of these. Imagine for your entire store, and Wizards of the Coast suggested that they be sold for only $39.99 each, which, as you can imagine, seldom happened. Stores could either let their extremely limited supply immediately sell out or raise prices to what the secondary market was charging, which was usually in the $100 range. This is what many Magic the Gathering players remember about From the Vault, the markups and bad feelings. When From the Vault was eventually retired, it was replaced with Signature Spellbooks, a very similar product that contained 9 reprints and 1 random foil version of those 9 reprints, all for about $19.99. So you were getting about 2/3 of the number of cards that From the Vault had, and they were all in non-foil, but the price was $20, and for the most part, they printed enough of these and lowered the value of the reprints enough to keep these mostly in stock at these prices. Spellbooks did not exist long. They went from Jace's blue spellbook to Chandra's red spellbook to Gideon's white spellbook. RIP, because then Wizards of the Coast decided to ramp things up with this product line, and Signature Spellbooks became Commander Collections. Instead of Freya Lee's Green and Liliana Black, the remaining 2 spellbooks were rebranded as Commander Collection Green and Commander Collection Black, and instead of a random foil card in each, they were offered in foil and non-foil versions with fewer cards and higher prices. The changes here, quite frankly, were a slap in the face. To go from the Vault products of 15 cards in rainbow foil that was intended to be sold for $40 to spellbooks, which were 9 cards intended to be sold for $20, Commander Collections featured only 8 cards, and yet the non-foil versions were intended to be sold for $89.99, and I kid you not, $249 for the foil version. And they sold at these prices. They continued and completed out the Wooburg line, and this, in my evaluation, is the first real portent of things to come with Magic the Gathering products. To me, discontinuing event decks for challenger decks made sense, and even though I disagree with the final product, so too did turning intro packs into planeswalker decks. I miss dual decks and Deck Builder's Toolkits, but the starter kits do serve a fine function and at least are extremely affordable. But the absolute min-maxing on display with the Commander Collections, which, by the way, were indeed repurposed spell books, is what led us to where we have found ourselves today. In my evaluation, Commander collections were the beginning of the end. A lot of our variety of products had already started disappearing, and Wizards of the Coast was experimenting with direct sales of high-priced online products, like their experimental direct-to-consumer deluxe and mythic editions, where they tested the waters for online sales. The online-only deluxe edition was especially egregious, as they wanted a whopping $449 for it. In my review, I unintentionally exposed how expensive Nintendo is getting today. $449. There's a lot to unpack. $449 can buy things like a brand new Nintendo Switch with Super Smash, Mario Kart Deluxe, and Pokemon Let's Go Eevee. And sell they did, so much so that online websites crashed again and again, and Wizards of the Coast discovered that people were willing to pay higher prices than they ever imagined. Secret Lairs are what came not long after, and honestly, I think that is the biggest reason for the lack of product diversity on shelves today. It's not easy printing a big box of physical cards and shipping it to game stores all over the world. Those shipping costs are high, and both distributors and game stores also need a cut of the final price as well. But with Secret Lairs, you're mailing an envelope of about 5 cards direct to consumers for the same price that many of these products once sold for. Designing 2 60-card dual decks to be played against one another, or figuring out a viable competitive challenger deck, takes time, testing, resources. And it's easier to just do new artwork for 5 reprints and again, pocket all the profits for yourself. And don't get me wrong, I do like Secret Lairs. My main criticism of them has always been just that there's too many of them and too little overall value, and I do not think they directly killed the diversity of products we once enjoyed at our local game stores, but I do think, if nothing else, it is extremely hard for new products to compete with something like a Secret Lair. When premium decks went away, sorry I didn't cover them here, but I have a whole retro review about them if you want to keep watching, Mark Rosewater explained that it was simply a matter of people loving them, but not enough to justify their sales. And yeah, that's business, baby. I am sure the answer is the same for many of the products I covered here. The profit margins just weren't as high as, say, those online-only mythic editions. Still, I think there is value beyond just profit in at least some of those products. I covered recently how Commander precons are probably not the best first purchase for a brand new Magic the Gathering player. And without products like dual decks, what is the best pickup for a newer returning player to start with? Without event decks and challenger decks, how do you get started at Friday Night Magic without needing to be online enough already to download a deck list, to even know where to find one and which one to download, and then buy all the cards that are needed for it? How? Dual decks, event decks, challenger decks, and the many other products now long gone gave players onboarding access to the many ways to enjoy Magic the Gathering. Maybe they weren't outrageously profitable, but they had value nonetheless. Many Magic the Gathering players lament and complain about Magic the Gathering just being Commander now, but it's the only format with products on the shelves. You grow the garden that you plant. So what exactly do the shelves at our local game stores reveal about what Magic the Gathering is cultivating? I don't fully know the answer. Maybe you do, and you will let me know in the comments below. Do you think any of these old products could survive today? Are you glad that they went away? Let me know what you think about the lost history of Magic the Gathering products and where you think we should be headed. And remember, I'm giving all of this away and more this Thursday at 3 p.m. Pacific on my Whatnot stream. Come talk with me. Maybe you'll let me know your thoughts there in that stream, and I'll be giving all of this away. Plus, you get a $15 credit when you sign up at www.whatnot.com/invite/Tolarian College. $15 credit to spend on Magic products, or, maybe you want a signed playmat and just hang out with me, the professor, and maybe walk away with one of the last remaining Magic the Gathering products there is. Or a booster box. Ow.